Margins with Siobhan Henry, pushing boundaries of social exclusion.
Hello and welcome to the Margins podcast, where we push the boundaries of social exclusion through dialogue. My name is Siobhan Henry and we are joined behind the scenes by Mzi Kaka, who heads up Margins' public education campaign, and his talented production team at the Academy of Sound Engineering, Pule Sarache and Lebogang Sibanyoni. Today we will be exploring why giving back matters in the fight against marginality, and I have the great pleasure of introducing our special guest, Mr. Ntoshane Mohlamonyane. Ntoshane is currently the strategic manager to the CEO of the South African National Space Agency, and he also co-founded Dining for Good, a not-for-profit that hosts events for the less fortunate. Ntoshane is a passionate, dedicated and results-driven professional with over 17 years of professional experience in strategy development and implementation, stakeholder relationships, industry development, international business advisory, market and business development, and people management. And Ntoshane has worked in both private and public sector organizations in Africa, Europe, Middle East, and the United Kingdom. Welcome, Ntoshane.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. It's great to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
It's great to have you here. So, to start, a really impressive biography, and I think a lot of young marginalized individuals listening today will want to know how you rose to such great heights. What is your answer, Ntoshane?
Obviously, every story is unique, and I always start off by saying that I'm just an ordinary African village boy from the dusty roads of a village named Ntoshane in Limpopo. And I'm mentioning this because my first encounter with the English language in a formal setting didn't happen until I was 16 years old. This is in grade 10. And by mere fact that up to that particular point in one's life, you could not speak English, already that puts you in a certain box. And when you then go to certain schools or even come up to Johannesburg for studies, etc., you're already on a back foot. And to a certain extent, you are, in a way, an embodiment of this marginalization that we talk about. And so I always, try to mention that particular point because obviously people don't know the story behind the man. They always just see the highlights and they don't know what it took and everything else that led to the person that is Ntoshane today.
That's a beautiful story, and I'd like to dig a little deeper there, Ntoshane, and ask you, when you look back at that young man who's 16 years old on the dusty streets of Limpopo, what are the words you'd like to say to him?
The words I'd say is, and I think there's a German philosopher that I like, and I always quote him, and his saying is that keep truth to the dreams of thy youth. And I always had these dreams. I didn't know how they were going to come about. I didn't know what it would take to achieve those dreams, but I just knew that they were those dreams. So what I would say is keep true to the very same dreams that you have.
That's beautiful, and I think we can all apply that to our lives. Now, you mentioned, the obstacle of not being able to speak English. We also know that Limpopo remains today one of the most impoverished provinces in our country, and there's so much more that needs to be done to actually bring development to Limpopo province. What is your guidance to young people that are in such places and that are very demoralized by the environments that they find themselves in? What has been your secret to success, Ntoshane, and to breaking down the barriers of marginality in your own life?
So maybe to expand a little bit more on the story regarding the English language, is I mentioned that was up until grade 10, because all my education was in my village up until the age of 16. And that's when I actually moved to a school where they spoke a little bit of English, but more Afrikaans. And just to bring this into a bit more context, where that became a real challenge. Now, when you're in grade 10, you're 2 years away from matric. Now, of course, having two and a half years to get the English going before you actually sit for your final, metric exam was a challenge. So, and I'll break down in terms of what it took and some of the things that I actually went through to get through that particular barrier. But just to also mention the fact that one of the things, and hence I said, one cannot take this lightly. And I know, of course, today English is all over the place and everybody speaks English. I remember when I was in matric, I was still struggling. And, when you're doing economics, back then it was economics higher grade. You're doing economics and all your subjects in higher grade, which meant that the language itself was a barrier. And now having to actually even comprehend the content of the subjects that you're doing was just a whole nother level. So one had to, every single day of matric, when school was out, stay behind with a dictionary, translate every single lesson of that day so that I could understand what was being taught. And that's sort of what one had to go through to be able to make it. And I'm saying this because in terms of some of the things that I did, I think sacrifice is one of the words that comes to mind here. And it's sacrifice on a number of levels. At a personal level, that's what I had to do. I mean, as a young person, you want to, after school, go out and do what young people do. But unfortunately, I didn't have that luxury. I had to, sacrifice time out there playing with my mates to make sure that I actually understood my schoolwork. But I think also sacrifice from those around me, because it took a lot for my own family that I was born into to sacrifice for me to go to a certain type of school instead of just staying in a village school. So that is another thing that I think cannot be taken lightly. And of course, I know it sounds like a cliche, but hard work. Nothing replaces hard work. You have to do your part. There is no shortcut. There is no way of making it. If there is work for you to do to achieve your dreams, you will have to put in the work. And that's one of the things that I think worked, because had I made the sacrifice, or had my family made the sacrifice that they did, but if I wasn't willing to do the work, well, I guess we will never know now, but chances are I may not have made it as quickly through, that barrier as I had. So I think it's that. And I think the other one is relationships outside of my own, personal circle of friends, etc. Building relationships with for example, with schoolmates, with your lecturers. I was that person who, I remember when I got to UJ, it may have been about 50 or so of us in one module, and I knew every single person by name, including all the lecturers. And it wasn't because I just, wanted to be. I took my time to build relationships. And that helped a lot when it comes to various parts of my life where I may needed assistance or interventions. And particularly for marginalized individuals, you will not make it by yourself. There is no such thing as a self-made millionaire or self-made success. We exist as people at a particular place together for a reason. So I think that, for me, is one of the things that I would really highly recommend. That, of course, yes, do make your sacrifice, put in the work, but also build relationships, because one of the opportunities that you're looking for, whether be it in work, whether in business, or even opportunities for bursaries and whatnot, chances are it'll take a relationship with somebody at one level or another to make that happen for you.
No, fantastic, Ntoshane. And I think you've raised a number of different issues relating to marginality that we've been, trying to create education around in margins. The first one is build social capital. Folks that are listening, when Ntoshane talks about networks, that is social capital that you can draw from to grow your experience, to give you access to more opportunities out there. Make sure you meet as many people as possible in order to help you overcome the obstacles of marginality. But you also raise the issue, Ntoshane, about the fact that your hardships as it relates to marginality, yes, hard work played a part, but I think a lot of the people who aren't aware of what marginalization is all about think that the onus is primarily on marginalized people to do the work and then you succeed. And they're not aware of, the language barrier that you mentioned, coming from a rural area, having not been exposed to a learning model that was outside of the village. We were having a discussion with Dr. Warren Likely Chalklin not so long ago, who's in the space of socially just learning and teaching. And we are talking about dropout being the word that we use in society as if, young people choose to just fail at their education, when actually it's a case of push out. Because as a marginalized individual, and you've raised a number of challenges that you experienced, and like you rightly said, you would not have overcome had it not been for your support system. And we have in a society where that support system is rapidly degenerating, right? The fabric of our society is unraveling. So what is your message today about the phenomenon of push out, of our society not taking responsibility for the marginalized and supporting them? And how do we create a society that's more caring to the marginalized?
So my response to that would be, firstly, I think we need to recognize the fact that we are diverse people. And diverse not just by color, not just by religion, sexual orientation, etc., but even personalities, skills, strengths, and etc. And the reason I say that is we are not all, if I can use this example, we are not all meant to be academics. We are not all meant to go to university and get a PhD. There are some people who will be fantastic at plumbing and they'll be the best plumber in South Africa. But we have got those people sitting in classrooms because our current system kind of treats us, they're using the sort of one-size-fits-all approach. And I think as a society, we need to recognize that we are not all meant to just fit one particular context. People have got different skills, have got different talents. So, and as a result, I think that's where the push out happens because, you find yourself in a situation where, if I can use a football example, where you have somebody who's got the level of footballing skill as a Ronaldo or a Messi, but the person is being pushed to become a lawyer. Right. And at the end of the day, you get somebody who is not even operating in the area that they are gifted in. But because we as society are pushing them a certain narrative, people like that tend to end up being frustrated. And as a result, to a certain extent, some people get pushed out because they just find they don't fit. And to a certain extent, that's how marginality ends up being exacerbated, because now you have a situation where a person does not fit what's been designed for a lot of people. And whether be it, again, could be a language area, could be a skills area, could even be a cognitive ability. And the fact that they can't fit in with the rest, they find themselves having to either work extra hard or they just cannot make it through. And as a result, we need to, as a society, as I said, recognize the fact that we can't have a system where everybody is expected to be the same, because we are not the same, and that is for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And I think you've raised a lot of issues relating to the limitations that society places on us. So we're forced to fit into a mold. And Ntoshane, would you say that we as marginalized individuals also place limitations on ourselves?
Yes, I'd say so. I'd say as marginalized people, we do place limitations. And some of it, there are obviously quite a number, but the ones that come to mind, one of them would be, it could be, for example, operating from a place of fear, where there is fear of failure, because, you just think, without even trying, that I don't think I will be able to make it out of my situation. It could also be fear of the unknown as well, and fear of rejection. Because what I've also personally experienced is in instances where we are a group of marginalized people, and one of us that really has got an opportunity to make it out of the particular environment and, socially speaking, be able to do better economically, etc., they end up having to just try and conform to the environment, because if they are different, if they make it out of a certain community, they will be spoken about, they will be rejected. So there's that limitation we place on ourselves by, I suppose one could say, fear of not belonging to a group or to a certain community that is familiar to oneself. So that would be one of the limitations that I'm thinking about. And I suppose also I'll call it self-disqualification. People say, I would like to become a doctor because I can or because I deserve to be. Some people will give you 1,000 reasons why they cannot become a doctor. So they already disqualify themselves without even trying to give an opportunity the chance. And maybe the final point I'll say is just, I suppose, also being unaware of one's full or true potential. The fact that I'm confined to a certain village and only the epitome of success in the community that I grew up in either could be, drug kingpins or criminals. I therefore tend to think that's all there is to life. And without even tapping into anything that exists beyond, the streets of my village. So I think those are, some of the limitations that comes to mind that we sometimes put on ourselves.
Oh, fantastic. And, you raised an issue that Margins has been trying to educate the public about, which is marginalization is a two-way process. So as much as we get marginalized by society based on some of the things you raised, like gender, race, socioeconomic status, we also withdraw from society, which places us at a disadvantage. And you mentioned one of the reasons for doing that is we're afraid to be rejected by our marginalized community through success. So my question to you is, how did you actually overcome the fear of that two-way marginalization?
Interesting you raised that, because the story about being a marginalized person who reaches new heights is you are then caught sort of in between these two worlds. So once you reach a certain level of success, you no longer belong to the community that brought you up. But at the same time, you're not fully accepted into the community that you are actually, trying to integrate into. So you are too out to be in, but you're also too in to be out. Wow. So you are sort of in these two worlds where you have to oscillate. And sometimes that's where code switching even happens. So when you get into certain communities, you pretend not to know certain things or you speak a certain language. And when you're in certain contexts, then you actually just adapt. So that's what one has to do, because we exist in this one big global village. But because we play different roles, I'm an employee at the office, but I'm an uncle and a brother and whatnot at home. So I have to find a way to be able to live in these different worlds. So that's just sort of being the coping mechanism to a certain extent, because you cannot just literally disassociate yourself completely with the community that raised you where you come from, because those are your people. But at the same time, you're aspiring to achieve greater and new heights. So in a way, you find yourself in these two worlds. But I see it more as an advantage, because I see it as coming from a marginalized, background means that you can actually be an inspiration to those that are still in that particular that find themselves in that particular space. But at the same time, you do know that there's more that you can do, that you can achieve to actually even educate those that are privileged. Because to a certain extent, these are two worlds that, for many, many years have always coexisted. The have-nots and the haves. And therefore, having to migrate from the one to the next means that it's an opportunity when you integrate into certain echelons. Those people get to actually understand what it is to be you in that particular environment. So hence I said it's basically these two worlds that one has to oscillate in between, where you are, too in to be out and too out to be in to a certain extent.
Wow, that's a very powerful statement, Ntoshane. Too in to be out and too out to be in. And I want to ask you about the mental impact, the emotional impact as well of oscillating between those two worlds, as you said.
So it weighs very heavily on any individual. And in my experience, as I said, you find yourself having to code switch as a way to cope. And what that does, you end up in this no man's land where when you are, and I'll just use the two words, the haves and have-nots. When you're with the have-nots, which is part of what actually made you who you are, you feel indebted. You feel like I have to be here with my people. I have to contribute. I have to do charity, work. I have to do this. I have to do, what we also call black tax and things like that, because you have to give back. But now also on the other side, you're having to also live a life that you've always aspired to. So the mental health, your mental health does suffer, because you have to, to a certain extent, not pretend, but you have to get to a point where you realize that, I need to find I need to find that nexus, that place where I'm happy. There are some things that you tend to actually end up doing which don't make either of the two groups happy, but you have to really make a decision to say, look, I cannot carry on like this. If I am having to code switch in between the two worlds, at some point, these two worlds have to somehow collapse into each other to form one integrated world that accommodates me. But the mental health thus actually is a reality, because, and I'll use when one gets into certain communities that you're trying to integrate into, I'm not even talking lifestyle here, just, having to, in a corporate context where you walk into a room, everybody speaks English, and everybody went to certain type of schools. Everybody expects you to behave in a certain way. And some of the things you frown upon those things because maybe culturally is not what you'd be used to doing. It does impact you a lot, and you are having to find ways, some sort of a timeout to see, how can I actually make sure that I am okay to be able to cope in that environment. And a practical example I'll give is, as somebody who I've never taken alcohol, and I don't, and it's not for religious reasons or anything like that, it just never interested me. And now when you are in business networks and then people are talking about having whiskeys and things like that, I remember at one point being told, you will never succeed if you don't drink, because when you're out trying to entertain people, you need to be drinking with them. Now, I can attest that, of course, it did impact me, because now I was in a situation where I thought, do I now take up drinking just to make it in my career and compromise my own values? Or do I actually stand my ground and lose out a potential opportunity to make it? Now, I'm just talking here about sort of being able to progress economically. But can you imagine what that did to my mental health? Having to always sit around people who thought, oh yeah, we can't really trust you, or you're not really good at your job just because you are not like us. So that's just an example I gave. Having to cope with those sort of, events and occurrences, it takes a toll on one's mental health. But again, it's a decision one makes. Do you compromise values for your career? And some might say, do you sell your soul to make it? Or do you stand your ground and just, hope that regardless of what happens, you will still make it? So that's an example I can give with regards to that question.
And I'm sure there are lots of examples you could provide. And I think the question is, and I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this and having to face the same challenge of, how do I navigate this world of marginality and affluence and hold on to my authenticity as a person, but at the same time access the life that I've always been wanting to lead? What would your answer be?
I'll go back to Friedrich Schiller that I quoted at the beginning. Keep true to the dreams of thy youth. It doesn't mean you have to give up part of yourself to be that which you've always dreamed about. You can, firstly, I have to say this. You are perfect the way you are. You are normal. Whether you look different, whether you dress different, you speak different, you are the way you are for a reason. And that's what you bring to the table. That's what you bring to the table. Because if we all had to look the same, can you imagine how boring this world would be? Yeah. And we all had the same thought patterns, same perspective, same ideas. The way you are, that is exactly what you bring to the table. You don't have to compromise that. In fact, there is a lot that you bring into the table by looking different, by being different. Because if you walk into a room and everybody is dressed in white and you're wearing something with a bit of color or a bit of black, it means you are bringing something to the table. Yes, on the surface of it, it looks wrong, so to speak, but that's the beauty of it all. So I don't think you have to give up any part of who you are to make it and actually, accomplish your dreams. It's just about, of course, as I said, don't compromise who you are, but of course, be sure to do your part to accomplish that which you've always wanted to accomplish.
That's beautiful. And I think the message, that I'm reading between all the things that you're saying is that the strength and the beauty and the uniqueness of who you are as a person actually lies in those very things that society may judge you for and ostracize you for and marginalize you for. So Ntoshane, tell us how you leveraged on your unique experiences of marginalization in becoming the successful and responsible citizen of our society that you are.
So as I said, and I'll just use the English language as an example. You go through schooling system, 3 years was not enough to get the language. And then one ends up at the university where you are now in a lecture hall with people that, fellow students that went to, former Model C schools, and they spoke English just like the way you dreamt you'd speak English. So what I actually thought to bring to the table was the fact that I could not speak English. What that actually meant was I could speak at least 7 other languages more fluently. So that was one of the things that I actually leaned into as strength. I realized English is but another language. I can speak 7 others, so that's what I brought to the table. And I used that to my advantage. And as a result, that's actually even where my social circle actually literally quadrupled, because then I could speak and associate with many different people, all of whom I could speak their language. And of course, because English is such a widely spoken language, in no time, my English actually improved quite exponentially. However, when I look back, had I actually looked at that as an excuse, I would have stayed in my corner, and I guess we will never know what would have happened. But that's what I did. I looked into my strengths to help me deal with the marginality of what I faced in that sort of period in my life.
Fantastic. That's a beautiful example. I love it. And Ntoshane, you've been using your success to also give back to society through Dining for Good and other initiatives. Tell us about the driving force behind your social impact initiatives.
So the Dining for Good story, the reason it came about was quite personal. When I moved to the boarding school, from the village to the boarding school, again, as I mentioned, coming from an underprivileged background, didn't have much. In fact, I didn't even have school uniform when I went to a new school. So there was one of my village boys who had been going to the same boarding school, and he was, in stature, he was a much bigger guy than me. So when we got there and he realized I didn't have school uniform, so he basically passed down his entire uniform to me. And imagine somebody who was small wearing extra, extra large. So that's a picture you can have of me in my first day at school. Now, remember, this is a 16-year-old boy. Of course, by then, you're in your adolescent stage, you're very cautious about looks and everything. And it really did knock my confidence. Walking into a classroom with oversized clothes and when everybody else looked decent, so to speak. And it's something that stayed with me for years. And then I thought, that is not right. That is not how any school child should actually feel. And later on in life, when I met with certain individuals with whom we had, sort of things in common, and we wanted to give back. And I should say, in fact, that's actually how I met Mzi. And we ended up saying, look, let's do something to give back. And my birthday is in January. And I decided every year in January, yes, I didn't have much, but instead of my friends buying me gifts, I will actually go to a local charity, get the list of all the kids at that particular charity of school-going age, then share the list with my friends to say, instead of buying me a gift, pick a name from the list, buy the child's school uniform. And that's how it started. We did that sort of as how do we give back? And then that became something we did for, year on year, we did that. And then it grew from just school uniform to, and the reason we call the organization Dining for Good is every time, and this is still a culture in many countries, including in South Africa and Johannesburg, especially month end, people go out for drinks, people go out for meals, for dinners, can afford, you go to restaurant. And we thought, as we go out and we, de-stressing and having a great time, can we just take a moment to think about those that are not going to have a meal tonight? Can we take a moment and do something for those that don't have? And that's why we thought, okay, every time we go out to dine, we will select a cause for good. And we thought, actually, we can actually dine for good. And that's how the name came about, is how do we basically use our, not even bargaining power, but how do we use the little that we have? If it's 3 or 4 of us getting together, we put money together. I remember one of the things we did, we were getting together as a group of friends. I think there were about 4 of us. And we decided each of us is going to put 100 rands on the table. And then we're going to then find a family in one of the townships that does not have a breadwinner. And we use that money to buy them groceries. So that's how the concept came about. But basically, in a nutshell, it's about using the little that we have to give back and recognize that, look, there are people who are far worse, in a far worse position than where we are. And also having been there ourselves, it really would not be the right thing to do for us to just turn a blind eye and pretend like it's not happening.
No, absolutely. And how can people support your project, Dining for Good, Ntoshane?
I must say, the organization itself has been dormant for a little bit, but of course work still carries on in the background. And this year, actually is one of my goals to actually resuscitate Dining for Good to what we used to know it to be. And how people can support is to look out for when we have our monthly events and when we have and celebrate people's special days, birthdays being one of those. We know there's a couple of things that happen. One of them is every single person has got a birthday. I don't care who you are. You have a birthday, and whether you celebrate it or you don't, but that's one of the special days that can be leveraged through Dining for Good to see how do we support a cause that is close to your heart. Here's the other thing. We don't prescribe to you who you must support. All we're saying is if there's 15 of us, we will come and spend time with you to help you support a charity of your choice. So that's one of the things that I'd like to do this year and really get it off the ground once again to, make it more operational, so to speak. But most importantly, despite the sort of administrative side of it, to be more on the ground, working and supporting the marginalized.
And why is this important to you, Ntoshane? And why should others care about being on the ground and supporting the marginalized?
I think the answer to that is the fact that we don't exist in a vacuum. And I can tell you now, every single person listening to this, wherever you are, you know of at least one person that could do with some sort of, a hand up or a leg up or some sort of assistance. All of us know at least one person. And that's why I care. Because I think all of us, every single day, wherever we find ourselves, there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to give back. There is an opportunity to do good for somebody. Whether it's somebody that you may know directly or indirectly, but there are plenty of opportunities. Being a South African with the unemployment rate that we know, being on an African continent with so many different challenges, I think the scope is limitless in terms of where people can actually give. So for me, I give because personally, I have been a beneficiary of others that sacrificed for me to be where I am. I benefited from people also donating things to me, and I've benefited from people opening doors for me. So I do it not because, it's get brownie points and whatnot, because it's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, we are Africans, and we all know. We say we say that a child is not just raised by their parents, they're raised by a community. And that's the essence of who we are as Africans. So doing good, and I know we've got things such as black tax, which, by the way, I don't agree with that concept, but that's a topic for another day, because it's about giving back. It's about, recognizing that For you to be where you are, you're standing on the shoulders of others that came before you. And therefore, like Bonang Mohale said in the title of his book, you lift as you rise. Once you are at the top, put the ladder down so others can come up. So I do it because it's the right thing to do. And how else are we going to build a stronger, a more unified, better world if I don't start with that which is in front of me?
Lift as you rise. Powerful words, Ntoshane. And if I could ask, could you share with us your vision of what the outcomes could be from creating a more inclusive and equal society?
I think the departing point for me is us being able to unlock and tap into the potential that marginalized people actually are sitting within our communities. Because, as I said, very often marginalized people tend to be discriminated against. They are never consulted. They sort of live in the outskirts of the world that we all know. And how do we know that a lot of the people that we're marginalizing against are people who can actually help us tackle some of the most pressing challenges in our communities? So for me, I think it comes from that perspective that it's about ensuring that, as I said it earlier on, that we all coexist for such a time as this for a reason and a purpose. And there is no reason any one of us should be left behind. There's no reason any one of us should be discriminated against, because as we move forward, we don't know who is it that we're leaving behind. We don't know who it is that we actually not including in the conversation, because there are many ideas, there are many innovations, there are many perspectives that could benefit us as a society as a whole if we tapped into communities that we never actually even consult with whenever we're talking about tackling issues. So I think the right thing to do is ensuring that we all go at this thing together and nobody's left behind.
Oh, beautiful. And finally, Ntoshane, what are your closing thoughts on marginalization, and what can we expect to see from you in the future in the fight against marginalization?
My closing remarks that, firstly, as society, we need more education, and we need to start having daily, honest conversations about marginalization. And I'm not talking about that in an academic sense. The same way we talk about what trends on X and what trends on different social media platforms, we need to make that a normal thing to talk about marginalization, because that is the only way it will firstly remove the stigma about people that are marginalized. And that is the only way it is going to be not seen as a miracle when somebody does something to assist and support people that are in marginality. And I think most importantly, to start doing more in supporting and actually integrating marginalized people into our different circles, communities, and networks. Because as I said, we all coexist for a reason. For all we know, as a country, as South Africa, these economic unemployment issues that we are faced with, the individuals and ideas that could be coming to the table to help us resolve this and, take South Africa to where it belongs may actually be sitting with people that we have cast aside and we are marginalizing against. So that's my closing remarks on this. Let's integrate and work and support everyone to ensure that marginalization becomes something that we talk about, but something that really we will have overcome as a community. And from my side, as I said, I need to start getting back on the ground, like being the boots on the ground in terms of charity work and giving back. I have had the privilege of working with communities in South Africa and in different other countries. And I can tell you, marginalized people all want the same things that you and I want. They want to feel respected. They want to have access to opportunities. They want to live in communities where they feel safe and they feel protected. Similar things that you and I want. And I think we need to I want to actually make it my point to actually try and do more of that to assist in areas where I can. And also, with technology and AI, etc., look at how can I leverage those platforms to integrate marginalized groups and individuals that I've got to meet and integrate with in South Africa as well as others across the world. Because I think we're now living in an era where technology has kind of collapsed the borders of different countries into this one big global village. How do we take advantage of that? Because the strengths that we may tap into as South Africa in supporting our marginalized people, as I mentioned, we can't even measure what that is like. Now, can you imagine doing that on a continental level? What about even on a global scale? So it's to look at how do I leverage the few networks that I have in helping to address the issue of marginality.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ntoshane. That's all we have time for today, friends. Thanks so much to our very special guest, Ntoshane Mohlamonyane, for joining us. And in his words, let's normalize helping one another and making marginalization history. Until next time, let's keep pushing those boundaries. Thanks and goodbye.
This is Margins, pushing the boundaries of social exclusion.